Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 34 of The Kill File. I am so glad that you guys are here. First off, I want to give a huge shout out to those of you who have shared The Kill File on your own social media pages. Don't forget to follow us on our Facebook group or page, X, Blue Sky, TikTok, or Instagram for extra photos each week and reminders to listen to the newest episodes. That's it for business. Let's get to today's case. Today we are going for a cult. Yes, a cult. Haven't done one here yet, but they fascinate the shit out of me, and I've always enjoyed learning about them. I think that they are just so out there for me, and the level of submission from cult members just blows my fucking mind. Like, how? Anyways, today we are going to cover the Order of the Solar Temple. Ever heard of it? It's just nuts and fascinating with a sad ending, but I had to know more. Trigger warnings for today are going to be talks of murder, suicide, talks of death of children, and description of awful crime scenes. Also, much of today's episode is going to be talking about French or Swiss names and places, and I am so sorry if I butcher any of them. I am going to do my best. Let's jump in. The Order of the Solar Temple was created in 1984 by two of its leaders, Dr. Luc Jouret and Joseph Dimambro. The Solar Temple was created in Geneva, however, later on it would be moved to Zurich, and there were different regional branches or locations as well. Luc Jouret was said to be a homeopathic physician and something called a New Age lecturer. So I'm going to talk real quick a little bit about what the New Age movement is, because I think it will help us get a better understanding into what some of the people of the Solar Temple may have believed and where their heads could be at. There are going to be parts that we might think the things these members believed is totally out there, but I will tell you the New Age movement itself is probably something that even you have practiced or believed in and don't even know it. These are the concepts that one of the founders of the Solar Temple, Dr. Luc Jouret, lectured on. The New Age movement is a concept or movement that had kind of dispersed through metaphysical and religious communities, and this took place in the 70s and the 80s. This movement circled around a concept of what they considered to be the new age of light, love, healing, and personal transformation. Many of this movement's believers or followers believe in gaining mystical knowledge, and that not everyone has this knowledge. Rather, that gaining this mystical knowledge makes them special or elite. The movement of the New Age contains two pretty simple concepts. The first one, according to Britannica, is the followers could obtain a quote-unquote heightened spiritual consciousness, and by using this enlightenment, there could be an end to the problems of the world that include war, world hunger, racism, poverty, and sickness. The belief was that this transformation for the Earth's population could be obtained by large-scale spiritual awakenings of our next generations. The second concept was that individuals could obtain this state of mind through their own spiritual transformation, and that by doing this, the believer or follower would be on the sadhana, which is a new path of transformation and continual growth. So the New Age movement is seen still a lot today. It is said that occult practices like astrology, tarot readings, meditation, and yoga were actually integrated into the movement, and these would be tools that can assist people in their personal transformations. The New Age movement really speaks to people who need psychological help or are sick and may struggle to find healing through psychological therapy or traditional medicine. It steers them towards the direction of holistic healing and many alternative practices, like natural food diets, massage, acupuncture, and chiropractic healing, which most of us have probably practiced at some point. I know I enjoy a good massage or popping from the chiropractor. Many believers in the movement promote spiritual healing. There has been thought to try and integrate psychological counseling and divine practices like astrology and tarot readings, but that hasn't happened. In the 1980s, there came about two transformative tools, and these were the use of crystals and the concept called channeling. As the New Age movement was actually peaking in the 1980s, many believers and followers discovered their own psychic abilities, and these people were known as the channelers. It is said that channelers claim, whether it be in trance or in consciousness, that extraterrestrial or preternatural entities speak through them on various subjects, such as philosophical concepts, spiritual concepts, and psychological concepts as well. I think most of us have heard of some of these, like psychics or mediums. I have never been to either of these, but am fascinated by the concept. Have any of you guys had experience with these? And if so, please share your experiences on the Kill Files socials. I would love to hear them. Some of the more popular channelers back then actually founded their own new organizations. So by the end of the 80s, it was obvious that the peak and momentum of the New Age movement was dwindling. It was starting to be ridiculed for the believers' acceptance of so many unscientific practices and ideas, especially the crystals and channeling. By the middle of the 1990s, it was obvious that this New Age movement was dying out. According to the Britannica, the New Age movement would actually end up being one of the West's most notable religious phenomena in its century. It is stated that more than 1/5 of Western adults believe in astrology, and that between 3 to 5 million are actually identified as New Agers and accept many of the beliefs or practices of the movement that came out in the 80s. Dr. Luc Jouret was said to be born to Belgian parents in the year of 1947 and had graduated from medical school in Brussels in 1974. After this, he would join the military and serve his country as a paratrooper when after this, his medical interests would actually focus on more of the New Age medicine than the traditional medicine. Now that we know a little bit about Dr. Jouret, let's learn a little bit about the other founder who would end up being more of the dominant leader, controller, and dictator in the temple, Joseph de Montbreau. De Montbreau was born in France in 1924 and ended up being a jeweler until he would ultimately give this up to quote-unquote teach and lecture the New Age movement and other concepts. The first organization that de Montbreau was known to join in 1956 was something called the Amorc, or the Ancient Mystical Order of the Rosy Cross. And this would be a combination of Christian Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and Jewish mysticism, which I researched each one of these ideas, and let me tell you, I could go on and on for days with my fascination of religious ideals. But since we are here for the cult, I will just simply say the combination of these religious ideals really seem to focus on people being able to find a divine spark and seek a connection with their entity. After de Montbreau left the Amorc around 1970, he actually showed a lot of capability as a channeler and spiritualist, and wanted to find another organization that was maybe more intense, for lack of better words. De Montbreau would then join something called the Argeny movement, which is a religious movement that really focuses on the mythologies that are all connected to the medieval Knights Templars. So this is going to come up a lot in our talks of the Solar Temple beliefs, so I needed to know exactly what the Knights Templars are or is because I had no idea. The Knights Templar, according to History.com, was a vast organization of very devout Christians, and this was during the medieval era, and they were believed to be carrying out an important mission of not only military operations, but also to protect the European travelers that visited various sites in the Holy Land. This order was said to be not only mysterious, but powerful and wealthy. I guess when many visitors from Western Europe wanted to come to the Holy Land, there were a lot of them who were killed or robbed through different territories on the way. This is why the Knights Templar was created by a French knight. They would end up being endorsed by many religious and influential entities. The members of the Knights Templar swore oaths of obedience, poverty, and chastity, and the members were not allowed to swear, drink, or gamble. Well, I'm fucked. I don't drink or gamble, but I swear like the sailor that I am, and I'm not sorry about it. So after joining the Argeny movement, de Montbreau would travel to Egypt and Israel, and allegedly de Montbreau would conceive his son Eli on a mountain that is apparently associated with a biblical prophet named Elias. In 1971, de Montbreau would have a brush with the French authorities when he would be caught writing bad checks. After moving to Switzerland, he would actually start his career in 1973 as a yoga instructor and teacher of the occult philosophy. It was said that after this point in his life, de Montbreau would go on to create a large number of secret organizations. After the pair would meet in an off-chance lunch or dinner, as the two belonged to different organizations at the time, but had much in common with their beliefs, as they would soon find out. Not long after the pair met, de Montbreau would introduce Dr. Jouret to his mentor, Julian Origas, and Origas was actually the founder of the Renewed Order of the Temple, or ORT, and also at this time, de Montbreau had a foundation going called the Golden Way Foundation. The Renewed Order of the Temple organization had sort of intertwined the Templar ideals with the Rosicrucian beliefs of the aforementioned Amorc that de Montbreau was a part of before. After their introduction, Dr. Jouret would actually join the renowned Order of the Temple. Unfortunately, Origas would die in 1984, and following his death, Dr. Jouret would become the Grand Master of the ORT. For whatever reason that is apparently unknown, Dr. Joret would be forced out of the ORT nearly a year later, and when he left, he would take around half of the members with him. Dr. Joret at the time was already a member of DeMombro's Golden Way Foundation, and after this, the two would create the Order of the Solar Temple. So let's talk about the beliefs of the members and leaders of the Order of the Solar Temple. The OST led in the beliefs that Earth was going to face a worldwide catastrophe that would take place sometime in the mid-90s. Because of this, members believed that they needed to enter what was thought to be a higher spiritual plane that would be on the brightest star in our solar system called Sirius. So the Sirius star has always been kind of a mystery to us, but I do know that ancient Egyptians believed that the Sirius star, which they called the Sothis, was the cause of the Nile floods that started happening right after the Sirius made its first rise before sunrise of the year, around the same time that the annual floods started for the Nile. Therefore, the ancient Egyptians believed Sirius brought the flooding to the Niles to bring life, hydration, and fertility to the land. So, when researching why the belief of Sirius is so important to the Order of the Solar Temple, I ran across this website, and this man seems to have a lot of the same beliefs, and he kind of explained a little more its significance to certain organizations or belief systems. According to a website called VinceGauman.com, who is a firm believer and spreader of the belief in the power of Sirius, the star is the site that inhibits quote-unquote cosmic seers and advanced souls, end quote. According to this belief system, Sirius is filled with many beings or souls that have sought out and are actively practicing in more advanced studies. It is also believed that Sirius groups wise beings together and also teaches amazing wisdom to the individual souls and also transmits its own high-dimensional quote-unquote ancient wisdom across our universe and had played an important role in planetary evolution. So, along with the knowledge of this alleged catastrophic event that was going to happen in the 90s, members of the Order of the Solar Temple ultimately were hoping to gain the enlightenment and understanding that they needed before this happened that would lead believers and members to what they were told would be ascension. Basically, the members believed that when this event would happen, they, as a part of an elite group, would instead of just dying, ascend to Sirius, where they would be essentially reborn. The members were taught that the life we are now living was basically an illusion, and some of the more quote-unquote advanced believers were taught that Dr. Joret was a Knight Templar in a previous life, and that he would be the one to lead the members or his followers to ascension. During one of the documentaries I watched for research of the Solar Temple, one member who was able to make it out, Herman Delore, gave a lot of insight into the Solar Temple's commonalities. It was said that not only do the members wear clothing of plain colors and live off the land, basically giving up their materialistic items, but they also gave a lot of their money to the Solar Temple as well. It was said that one of Dr. Joret's roles were to bring in the higher means members. For example, one of the members of the Solar Temple was a man named Camille Piet. He was the director of a major watch company called Piaget. This man would bring a lot of profit to the Solar Temple, and as such, he was sort of able to skip ahead of other members. What I mean by this is that the Solar Temple focused a lot of its beliefs around rituals and ceremonies that many of were actually recorded, but because the Solar Temple wanted to keep the shroud of mystery around it for the members to continue to feel elite, they blurred their faces out in the recordings. If you get a chance to look some of these up, you should. It's very fascinating. In the Solar Temple, there were many ceremonies and rituals performed, and the members would sort of climb the ladder of importance, and for each level or rung that the members were able to obtain, they would receive a robe of different colors or materials. These robes were a huge significance to the members of the Solar Temple. Once members were able to reach what was considered the inner circle, these were the only members who had the knowledge of all of the doctrines for the temples. Doctrines, in case anyone doesn't know, because I didn't, are like instructions, principles, or like a set of beliefs for a specific group. It was known to the inner circle that there were 33 different spiritual entities or masters, and the belief was that these entities inhabited the temples that were buried below the Himalayas and Zurich. One of the members mentioned before, Herman Delore, spoke to the significance of the inner sanctum that all of the members longed to be a part of. He even said he felt himself that he shared this knowledge with such an elite group of people that he felt above other people around him, and he felt this sense of arrogance that he was smarter and more enlightened and all around better than other people. He also said that the allure of being in the inner circle and obtaining the secrets of the temple and the ascension was very strong. It was also said that once a member was in the inner sanctum, there would be revelations, and some included messages from their quote-unquote spiritual masters that were all mysterious. Sometimes it was said that the apparitions of these mysterious spirits would visit the members of the inner sanctum, and there would be objects that would materialize, and these objects had spiritual significance, and of course, this was just proof of how blessed the temple members were. The leaders would then tell the members how they were the only people on the entire planet who got to see these significant things, and explain that even other people of significance on this earth were unable to see these things, but they, the members, were even more elite than the others. One member who was also able to make it out before some of the horrendous things happened to the Solar Temple members, named Thierry Huguenot, spoke to the fact that it was sort of bother the other members when someone of higher means like the watch company tycoon were able to obtain their multiple levels or robes all in one night, and also paid for their entire year of their contributions at one time. I can only imagine how off-putting that would feel to be a part of this temple and then feeling like these robes are so sacred and shrouded in this cloud of mystery and eliteness, and then someone comes in and gets everything that you worked hard for in just one sitting because they're rich. I feel like myself at that point would feel like the whole idea was so cheap. Another thing that the Solar Temple was in belief of is reincarnation. In fact, it was the belief of the temple members that some of the leaders and higher-ups in the temple were actually reincarnations of famous religious and historical figures. So, when this wealthy watchman, Camille Pillet, came to the temple, paid for all of his dues for the year, and received all of his robes in one sitting, Dr. Jaurès, knowing all of the fortune that was being brought by Camille, used the excuse that Camille was actually the reincarnation of Joseph Arimathea. Upon further research, Joseph Arimathea was a wealthy man that came from Judea. It was said that he was righteous and a good man that was part of the council of the Jewish court system, but was also a secret follower and supporter of Jesus. Allegedly, after Jesus died, Joseph asked for permission to take his body and give him a proper burial, and this was granted. A few legends that are said of Joseph are as follows. It was said that Joseph was Mary's uncle, so Jesus' great uncle. He brought Christianity to Britain. He built Britain's first church. He brought 2 vials of Jesus' sweat and blood to England. And finally, he apparently brought the Holy Grail to England and was said to have hidden it inside of a well at Glastonbury. And this is now called the Chalice Well. I have said this before and I will say it again. I am not a religious person, so I do my best when I research for you guys and share what I find. So, if Joseph was this significant in the Bible, it makes sense that telling the members that this Camille man was his reincarnation would explain why he was able to climb the ladder or the robes so quickly. Also, there was a lot of talk about the Holy Grail when it came to the Solar Temple, as they claimed to be the ascendants from the Knights Templar, and apparently the Knights Templar also guarded the Holy Grail. In fact, the leaders would tote that they indeed had Jesus' blood, and even said that the Knights of the Round Table had appeared to some of the members of the temple. So, fun fact, I didn't know that the Holy Grail was supposedly like a real thing until not that long ago. I had always thought that it was something from the Indiana Jones movies I saw as a kid. Okay, let's talk for a little bit about some of the more eccentric practices of the Order of the Solar Temple. One of the things that came surprising to me during my research was the sheer control the Solar Temple had over its members. Not just down to their plain clothes and humble means, but also the fact that they controlled every aspect of the members' lives, including what they ate and who they were with romantically. It was said that the members of the temple would, at times, be ripped apart from their partners that they were already with, and the leaders of the temple would put new couples together. It was just known to the members that this was just one of the sacrifices they must make in order to accomplish one of the goals of the Solar Temple, which was to create the next generation of members, and these were called the Cosmic Children. I guess they believed that if they were to put certain people or members together, that they would reproduce, and those children that came from that couple would in fact be these Cosmic Children. Also, it was said that Dr. Jaurès not only told his followers that he was a Knight Templar in a previous life, but he was also the 3rd reincarnation of Jesus Christ himself. In some of his most eccentric acts, Dr. Jaurès, prior to some of the rituals he would perform, would choose a woman from their flock to have sex with, and this supposedly would give him quote-unquote spiritual strength for him to then enact this ceremony. So, this whole thing was giving Jonestown vibes to me while I was researching and learning about this cult, but I swear, one of the hallmark rules of a cult when it comes to leaders who are men always revolve around sex with their female members. Whether it's for some cosmic reason or whatever, they always seem to brainwash people into thinking that they need to have sex with women of their cult for one reason or another. I have heard this time and time again. I hate it. It's sick. And they are 100% taking advantage of their members. At one point, DiMambro had a baby girl with one of the members, and he would announce to the members that this daughter of his was a cosmic child and a messiah of sorts. I also read in some sources that the son that he conceived on the mountain in Egypt was allegedly a prophet and was usually at DiMambro's side until he wasn't anymore. One of the worst things that I found during research for this case was that at some point there was a baby born to one of the members in the OST, and apparently DiMambro claimed that this baby was the Antichrist and was a very dangerous rival to the destined cosmic messiah. I'm assuming that he means his daughter. It was reported that he actually ordered the murder of this 3-month-old baby just because he believed the baby was the Antichrist and a threat. I'm sorry, what? I have been trying very hard this whole time to hold in my opinions of these people's beliefs because I strive to not be offensive to others' beliefs, at least not to their faces. Of course, what I believe to be real or true is another story, and I share that with my inner circle, but I don't ever want to offend others because to each their own. But here is where I will draw the line. I know the men of cults brainwashing women into sleeping with them is sick and wrong, but they are adults. This is now crossing the line into infanticide. How in the world can anyone believe that some sweet, innocent baby only 3 months old was the fucking Antichrist? Are you kidding me? And what parents in the world would allow this to happen? Are you telling me that you are so brainwashed and sick in the head, you would allow this twisted fuck to take and essentially have your baby murdered? If you are that fucked up, you don't deserve to have children, just saying. But they could still allow someone else to adopt this baby outside of your cult. Ugh, it's sick. I saw conflicting reports of a specific baby and its parents and anyone around it that were murdered, so I don't know if it was this baby in particular, but also reports of this baby being taken and killed. And of course, with all of this cult being surrounded in secrecy and it being a part of the allure that you don't ever let the secrets outside of the temple, who knows what other horrific things happened inside of this cult. It was said that the new members had to actually pass different initiations to even be a part of the temple, including swearing to keep the secrets of the solar temple. Here, in their various rituals, whether it be for initiation or for the next level of robes, the temple would use rituals, symbolic items, candles, and swords, and it was all part of the allure that the members wanted to be in on the inner circle and learn the secrets of the next world. During their initiations, former members reported that they had to swear absolute submission to the solar temple and its beliefs. Of course, once members were initiated, the leaders would use fear-mongering during its rituals and ceremonies of sorts to again convince members of the apocalyptic future of Earth, and that only through ascension to Sirius could they live on while the rest of humanity would just die with the destruction of Earth. So, now let's talk about how things started to take a turn for the worse for the Order of the Solar Temple. It would start in the early 90s that some of the members and former members would start to challenge the authority of DiMambro. Even while some people were starting to think twice about the teachings and the authority of DiMambro, it seemed like these same members still believed in the teachings of Dr. Jaurès and still wanted to be close to him. I wondered myself if it was because he was a doctor, but it also seemed like DiMambro was more of the authoritative dictator type. Dr. Jaurès was said to be more charismatic and charming and drew people towards him. At some point within the temple members, even some of the higher-up members, were starting to learn that the apparitions that they were privy to seeing were in fact just smoke mirrors and holographic images. In fact, DiMambro's own son, Eli, would come out and tell some of the members that he himself had actually witnessed his own father's trickery and his father's alleged illusions during some of the ceremonies. This would, of course, cause some of the members to leave the order. This would be a major hit to the believers because Eli was supposed to be, quote-unquote, this child of destiny and was destined for some greatness for the temple, as was Dr. Jaurès' son that was born in 1983. And his son was supposed to be the Grand Master of the, quote, Temple of the New Era of the Virgin, end quote. I'm scared to know what that would have been. Instead, Dr. Jore's son's mother raised their son in normalcy. So, one of the higher-ups in the temple we have mentioned before, Thierry, spoke to the fact that he was quite devastated when he found out about the holographs and the lighting tricks. Now, to us with 2025 eyes, we would immediately think of holographs or AI or whatever if we were told that this thing that we're seeing is some kind of spirit of some great religious figures. But back in the early 90s and late 80s, I can imagine how easily the members could be tricked. This wasn't widely used like it is now. When Thierry and other higher-ups questioned the doctrines and had discovered the apparitions were not real, he would be told that he himself was just the vessel of Saint Bernard the Clever. He was allegedly this saint's reincarnation, which could probably explain to Thierry why he was so smart and clever and figured all of this stuff out. Thierry would go on to say that he was then torn between the upset that he felt and probably the crumbling of what he had believed to be true, and still yearning to be on the inside of this bubble for the elite that he had devoted 14 years of his life to. Actually, he spoke to the fact that during this time he wanted to commit suicide, to not have to feel the way he did anymore, and that he could not bear this situation any longer. While it was said that some of the more disgruntled ex-members were starting to leak some of the secrets from within the temple to the authorities, it would ultimately lead to surveillance on the temple and even some planted undercover members, or at least that is what's believed. I'll explain more on this later. It would be found out that the leaders of the Order of the Solar Temple were living in complete contrast of the lower members of this temple. The members, as we stated before, were dressed in plain clothes and had humble means and lived off the land, working and doing things for their community of the temple. However, the higher-ups lived lavish lifestyles of luxury and first-class seats when they traveled, etc. It's pretty obvious the control the leaders had over the members and the money these members were quote-unquote donating went to feed the lifestyles of these leaders. So as some of the members were starting to at least question the leaders of the temple and their authority, it was said that Dimambro was starting to become more and more paranoid. Due to some of this paranoia, Dimambro started blackmailing some of the members who were either trying to leave or no longer wanted to pay their dues and fees to the temple. For example, Camille Piet was blackmailed when he refused to donate more money to the temple. They blackmailed him by saying that he would be exposed for some of the sexual relations that he had had. This period of uncertainty caused the two leaders to try and keep some of the more rebellious members on board by telling them that they were reincarnations of great saints. Just one of the problems the Solar Temple was facing was not only the possibility of being surveilled by the authorities, but Dimambro and Dr. Jore themselves seemed to be squabbling over the direction the temple would take. It was stated that the only thing that these two men were still in any agreement on was the preparations for the quote-unquote transit or ascension to the other world needed to start. At one point, the members would be summoned together and then told that the structure of the temple was going to be changing, and Dimambro then told all of the members that they were to directly report to him. To me, it almost seemed like this was a power grab. During this paranoia and slight chaos that was starting to be shared by some of the members, including the other higher-ups, it was at this time one of the leaders named Jean-Pierre Vallet would approach Herman Delort and ask him to procure a gun. Herman said that was no problem and was able to quickly find him the weapon. When he handed it over to Jean, Jean told Herman there was a chance that he would never see this weapon again, and apparently Herman said sure, no problem. On the documentary, while Herman was sharing this story, he paused and said, quote, "Can you imagine being so stupid?" And then he laughed. It was really funny to see him call himself out for being so brainwashed and illogical. Then a few weeks later, Jean came back up to Herman and said the gun that he found him was fine and all, but he was looking for something a little different and something that had more of a silencer on it. Herman then turned to a friend of his who was a police officer at the time and asked him about the situation and where to find this type of weapon. And apparently his friend thought this whole situation was crazy and was no help at all. Then, without knowing it, one of the people that had been planted inside of the temple, who was actually an officer of the law himself, was someone that Herman had grown close to. Herman then approached this man and asked if he knew where he could get a gun with a silencer. It was decided within the authorities that this planted officer would get closer to Herman and whatever was going on by offering Herman just a plethora of weapons to choose from. Herman selected what he needed and then left the man and headed to Jean to give him the weapons. Herman was allowed to leave the undercover officer. However, on his route to give Jean the weapons, the authorities would stop and arrest Herman and charge a multitude of Solar Temple members with weapon charges. It was thought that Herman and the other members were planning some sort of a terrorist attack. However, Jean and Herman were only fined $1,000 each for their charges. Turns out the authorities had already begun to tap the phones of various members for surveillance, which is how they knew where Herman was planning to take the weapons. As the members, or at least the leaders, were preparing for this ascension before the apocalypse happened to the rest of the humans on Earth, the authorities were really trying to figure out exactly what was going on and happening inside of the Order of the Solar Temple. This was about the time that Thierry decided to leave the temple, and this would be a bombshell to other members, wondering what was going on if one of their own leaders could have left the way he did. Some of the members spoke to the fact that during these quote-unquote rituals that they would hold, some of them, as they were preparing for ascension, spoke to the fact that not only were they to believe that their bodies were just vessels and that this life was an illusion, but they were actually shown by other members of the temple how the death of their earthly vessels would happen, and of course they would just ascend then to Sirius and begin their other spiritual lives. The other members actually reenacted this for members to see by pretending to be dead and showing what would allegedly take place afterwards. They believed Sirius to not only be the origin of all humanity, but also be the final destination after they would transcend. In fact, it was in the mission statement of the Order of the Solar Temple that they were to prepare humanity for the return of the quote-unquote Great Solar Master, which to them was not only the Messiah, but this master facilitated spiritual enlightenment for this elite chosen group. To the believers, they truly thought that because they were a part of this group of the Solar Temple, that they would actually be granted eternal life on the star Sirius once they died here on Earth. This leads us to the horrific and sad events of this quote-unquote ascension. Now, I'm going to state right out of the gate that not only are the following events controversial and somewhat unsolved, there's also a lot to unpack here as far as what exactly took place on these days of this alleged ascension. On October 4th, 1994, in the small village of Chieri in Switzerland, a fire would break out at a farmhouse that would lead the firefighters in this area to come out and try to fight the fire. 3 hours after the arrival of the firefighters, they would gain control of the fire and started to enter the farmhouse. They would first find Albert Giacobino, sorry if I butchered that, who was allegedly labeled as a traitor, deceased with his head wrapped in a plastic bag, and this would actually conceal a bullet wound in his head. Authorities would later come across a garage that was underground, and when they opened the door to this quote-unquote meeting room, they would find a horrific scene. Inside, there would be found about 18 bodies of men and women, and one child, a boy, who was said to be only about 10 years old. The bodies were sprawled into a circle with all of their feet pointing towards the center of a circle in kind of a star-shaped pattern. Many of the victims or members were dressed in their ceremonial robes of black or red or white and gold. Some of them had their hands tied behind their own backs. Most of the members had been shot in the neck or in the head. 10 of the members had plastic bags over their heads, and in this room there was said to be a painting of a figure that was Christ-like, and the figure had a rose above his head. In another room that was located off to the side, the authorities would find another 3 bodies, and in this room they would find an altar that held a rose, a cross, and a golden chalice. The authorities then spoke to the fact that the place itself had been booby-trapped, that luckily didn't work, but if it had, it would have killed even more people, most of whom would have probably just been firefighters or other officials trying to help. It was said that the place had been trapped with, quote, 100-gallon bottles of gasoline wired to clocks set to go off, end quote. Can you imagine finding this scene? Just absolute chaos, death, and terrifying destruction. One of the victims, whose head was wrapped in a plastic bag, was none other than Camille Piet, the watch company tycoon. At this same time, over 60 miles away in the village of Salvan, there was another device similar to the one that they found in Chieri, but unfortunately this device did work. In an alpine village that was said to be about 100 miles south of Chieri, 3 different ski lodges would be engulfed in flames, and in this murder-suicide they would find 25 bodies, and this would sadly include 4 children. The members found here were unfortunately dead from poisoning or at least a mix of lethal drugs. However, it was reported that among the death and carnage, Here, there would be 3 members dead, and not from the poisoning, but rather from the fire itself. And this included 2 teenagers, the daughter of Di Mambro, the name that was given to her was Emanuele Di Mambro, and another teenager named Audi Severino. Alongside these 2 teenagers were 3 adults, including Ellie, the prophet son of Di Mambro's. Along with him was Madeleine Brat and Pauline Lemond. After some investigation, it was said that the authorities felt that most of the victims that were found in Chieri were murdered, but at least half that were found in Salvan had most likely committed suicide. These included an Olympic skier, her son, and 3 children of other members. It was reported that the authorities would find one little boy on a bed that was laying there and hugging another little girl who had been dressed in a red dress and was said to have almost been smiling when they were found. Oh, it kills my heart so much. Unfortunately, the children and some of the others were found to be deceased of shotgun wounds. This horrific event had been led by a Swiss psychotherapist named Christine Bonnet, who apparently had taken over the reins of the OST after Di Mambro's death, and among this group included 2 French police officers who were also members of the temple, although in the controversy over these events, it's not exactly clear if these were a suicide or murders of officers that were planted. After these 2 unfortunate murder-suicides were found and investigated, something would come to light. There would be letters along with videos sent to the media, to some of the former members, and apparently to scholars as well. The 5th document that would arrive would be said to have contained notions from Di Mambro himself about the conduct and incompetence of his former partner, Dr. Luc Jaurès. In some of the documents, there was reference to how some traitors had been executed, and these included Di Mambro's son, Elie. While there were thoughts that many of the quote-unquote core members of the temple were smart enough and strong enough to understand all of the implications of what this transit or ascension would include, the documents spoke to the fact that some of the weaker temple members may have needed some help to accomplish their transit. Again, the members of the order didn't believe that this was suicide by any means, but rather their ascension to Sirius. After these initial suicides were found, it would be Thierry who would warn the authorities that he felt that there would be more deaths to come, and he would turn out to be right. Another suicide or murderous event would happen just 4 short months later, where 16 more bodies would be found dead in Vercors, France. And in this instance, it was said that the bodies were burned and were also laid out in a star formation. A man named Jean Vracoy Mayer, who was considered a cult expert who at one time had been a part of the Swiss military intelligence, was hired by the authorities to give his insight into the matters of the mass suicide. One thing that Jean marked as different when it came to the OST compared to other mass suicide is the fact that the members of this temple didn't believe that what they were doing was actually committing suicide. Rather, they believed that they were just ending their time on Earth to then transcend to Sirius, and possibly there could have been a belief that after Sirius, they would eventually reach Jupiter, where they themselves would become secret masters. So the controversy that I speak of when it comes to these alleged suicides or to the members' alleged transits came from some of the evidence left after the tragic events. For example, some of the former members who may have still talked to members or interacted with some of them before the tragedies said that no one gave off any hints or anything else that this mass suicide was about to take place. In fact, it was the opposite, where people who were planning to commit suicide or whatever may stop doing some of their normal activities or behave in specific ways. It was said that the members of the OST, at least the younger generations, had plans to expand the temple. They had plans for the future, which would contrast this large suicide. One of the other problems that came up was the owner of the farmhouse in Chieri, Albert Giacobino, who was allegedly labeled as a traitor. Well, it turns out that this man was able to donate millions of Swiss francs to the temple, but had asked to be reimbursed now. Is that why he was labeled a traitor? Authorities wondered if some of the quote-unquote members who were not willing to commit suicide were actually murdered against their will, which would explain why some were shot, some were poisoned, and why some were zip-tied. There would also be a book that was later on written after these tragic events, and it would point out so many of the inconsistencies that were found when it came to the crime scenes. For example, why was one of the guns with the silencers found on the outside of the house where the members were shot and subsequently burned? One of the more odd things pointed out that one of the guns that was found at the scene was a one-shot gun, meaning to have killed or shot everyone that they did, it would have taken some time to reload the gun for every person, which led people to question if that is why some of the members were found with sleep aid or drugs in them. Some of the family members of the people involved in the Order of the Solar Temple didn't believe that their loved ones wanted to commit suicide by any means, and fully believed that this was a plotted out murder. Because there was so much paranoia from some of the leaders, it makes me wonder if they would have plotted this mass murder to keep their secrets from coming out, or if they really did believe that they would ascend. I mean, Demambro had to believe it, right? They found his son and daughter both dead as well. Or were they killed purely out of spite for being traitors at the end? Some of the people on one of the documentaries were interviewed, but their identities were concealed out of fear that this was not a suicide at all, and they still feared for their own lives. There was also some talks that this could have been a major cover-up and was actually committed by the authorities instead of the Solar Temple at all. For example, one of the treasurers from the Solar Temple, who chose to keep her identity a secret, spoke to the fact that it took the authorities 10 weeks after the tragedy to interview her, and she said that she got the feeling from the authorities that they were desperate to prove that the temple was a cult, and she said that she was even asked multiple times if she had either been asked or pressured by members of the temple to sleep with different members. To me, this isn't that weird because, as I said earlier, we know a lot of cult members are brainwashed into thinking that they have to sleep with one of the leaders or whatever. I'm guessing that's why they asked, but if you look into this case, you will see a lot of different controversial thoughts and conspiracies over what was actually going on, that this whole temple was a front for money laundering, that Demambro was involved in some stuff he shouldn't have been, and I didn't include that here because I could not ensure that those were true. So, I'm going to leave you guys with this final thought from the man that we have heard a lot about by now, named Herman Delore, who spoke on the documentary to the fact that he didn't believe that he would actually have been able to commit suicide with the members. However, he also said that after his therapist put it in perspective of that if Herman would have continued to be a member and in that place of belief and pushed for a long time to do this, and having the same beliefs that the rest of them did, maybe, just maybe, he would have been able to do this as well. Then Herman said something that he said even scared himself. He said he thought maybe putting himself in that headspace again from the Order of the Solar Temple that, yes, maybe he would have been able to pull the trigger when the time came, but he didn't feel that he would be able to pull the trigger on himself. Essentially stating that if he had stayed in the temple, that he probably would have continued to be brainwashed the way the other members were, and that he could actually see himself pulling the trigger to kill not himself, but possibly others. And that really seemed to scare him. It really shows the power of these types of cults. And that, my friends, is the awful story of the Order of the Solar Temple, their cult, their beliefs, and the sad ending to their story with the mass murders or suicides that took place as a result. So one thing I wanted to throw out there is that while the OST doesn't operate obviously as it used to, with almost all of its members at the time dead, there is some speculation that there are still some people out there with these beliefs, but that they may operate a little bit more underground. When it comes to the theories of exactly what happened, this is just my personal opinion, but I do not believe that the authorities would go through a mass cover-up just to take out members of the Solar Temple, especially knowing that children were also killed in this mass suicide or murder. Now, I do believe that some of the members were murdered and did not want to go through with the suicide for the ascension. It says as much in those documents that were sent to the authorities and the media after what happened, when it spoke of the fact that some of the members were going to need help, like the weaker members needed help with the suicide part. That, to me, basically is saying that they were killed, which makes sense from the drugging or the bindings of the victims. One source I saw said that some of the older children were actually able to convince the parents to let some of the younger babies live and not go through with the ascension and what was about to happen. But at the same time, I didn't see any other stories of children who survived it, so it makes me think that there were people who were leaders, or at least around, to ensure that everyone went through with this quote-unquote ascension, and maybe they had the job to finish anyone off who changed their minds or didn't want to go through with it. This whole story was just so sad, and hearing all of these beliefs that these members had just blew my mind. I think because it's just so unbelievable to me that I can't ever imagine being convinced that any of this stuff is true. I will say, though, that as I was learning about this cult, I felt like I've heard this story before when someone had told me before about some of the beliefs that there will be like another coming of Jesus Christ, correct me if I'm wrong, but that people like me who don't believe will be left behind and all of the true Christians will be taken away. I'm not knocking anyone's beliefs by any means, to each their own. I have no fucking clue what's going on, but it didn't seem that different than this group who was told that they were an elite group and had to do specific things to be accepted into the group, and that they would live past this earthly life. I don't personally believe in any of that stuff, as I am an atheist myself, but I wish that I believed in something other than just being gone when we're dead, and I understand why so many people do. It gives people hope that after death, which is innately terrifying for most people, that your life won't just end. I wish that were true, that there was this magical, wonderful place that we all go to see our loved ones. How nice is that? I'm just too scientific brained for it, and unfortunately for me, I see it as just the end. Boo. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this culty episode, something different, right? And I hope you guys will come on back next week as we delve into another episode of The Kill File. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop, either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on the Kill File's socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how The Kill File got started, and you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There is contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.